rejoindre sur Zoom et également dans la France entière sur Facebook Live pour notre deuxième invité d'honneur. Et quel invité, puisque nous avons rendez-vous avec monsieur Edgar Wright, que je remercie évidemment très sincèrement d'avoir accepté notre invitation. C'est une masterclass qui sera modérée par Aurélien Allin, qui est rédacteur en chef adjoint de Cinématiseur et qui va durer entre 30 et 40 minutes en anglais, mais vous pourrez la retrouver en replay illimité avec les sous-titres dans quelques jours. Je vous précise que nous avons mis en ligne déjà 2 films de notre invité que je vous recommande de voir ou de revoir, qui sont Shaun of the Dead et Hot Fuzz, à ne pas manquer. Et puis, nous retrouverons à la fin de cet entretien qui s'avère extrêmement riche et je pense qu'il va vous passionner. Et
Hello, Edgar.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing?
Hello, everybody.
London.
So, how are you right now?
I'm okay. I'm good. I'm in central London. I've been here since January. I've been here since the kind of coronavirus started. So, and central London is you know, I live in a sort of an area that's quite a lot of businesses and restaurants. So it's very, very quiet. It's very strange being in the center of a city and there nobody being about. I feel like I'm living in one of my movies.
Yeah, it's like Shaun of the Dead in a bit.
It wasn't lost on me. I kind of felt like I was, especially early on, when the very act of going to the supermarket was a dangerous expedition. I felt like I was living. I felt like I'd been kind of cursed to live in my own zombie apocalypse.
Is it strange to live in a world where your fantasy film becomes reality in a way, or?
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's definitely kind of. I mean, you usually like write these movies, like things like Shaun of the Dead and The World's End specifically, and elements of Hot Fuzz. There's always this kind of like sort of like paranoid fantasy about it. So when these things start to come true, it's like alarming, if not surprising.
Yeah. So you're one of the 2 guests of honor of the Champs-Élysées Film Festival, which is online this year. What does it mean to you in this situation to be part of an online festival?
Well, I'm happy to be here. I mean, I love coming to France, so I'm very sad I can't be there in person. So yes. I'll come back again in person anytime you want, because Paris is one of my favorite places to be. So I'm sad to not be there.
At the beginning of the lockdown, you wrote an essay for Empire magazine to encourage people to help their local theaters and local cinemas. Recently, Sam Mendes wrote another essay where he asked the streaming platforms, which, according to him, benefited from the lockdown, to help cinemas and to help film creation. Do you have a take on that or not at all?
Well, I think what I wrote in Empire was about ways to help your local cinema when it wasn't open. So, I thought about it. It was as the lockdown was coming, obviously as a big film fan and somebody that goes to the cinema like 2 or 3 times a week, and also I go to lots of places that are within walking distance of my house. When they started closing, that was a sort of a sign for me, like where it kind of hitting me, like on a personal level, where not only is it I love to do, so it was. So then I'm sort of concerned about, there are lots of articles about cinemas being kind of as an industry being something that would be in serious trouble, and I'll still. So I wrote the piece for Empire about ways that you could help, and one of those things, especially with independent cinemas, that you could, if you frequent a place and you're not a member, you could buy a membership, or if you wanted to buy a membership to somebody else, or gift cards, or something, places that you go to where actually you could help them during the lockdown. So that was one thing. Sam's article, which I thought was fantastic, I thought that he was talking primarily about live theatre, and asking like Amazon and Netflix to, sort of come in as kind of profit partners, because so much talent had come from the theatre world. I mean, I don't know how I feel about sort of, you know, the big streaming giants helping cinemas, because I feel like, especially Netflix, it seemed to be, you know, in their general DNA, like sort of against cinemas. And you know, like, so I'm not quite sure about that, like, sort of, because I you know, I'm a big believer in the big screen tradition, and even though, like everybody else, in the last few months, I've been watching things at home, the majority of it on DVD and Blu-ray, and then a lot of streaming things as well. But I still believe in the big screen experience, and I believe that it will survive as well. And there's a lot of people that always want to kind of claim that the medium is dead. Not the medium of film, but the idea of exhibition. I don't think that's true, and I'm not sure that Netflix is the savior. I think sort of, but I liked his idea about them subsidizing theatre. I think that's a good idea.
You like the theater experience, but you also like the physical cultural object. We know that you buy a lot of DVDs and Blu-rays, and you even filmed characters that were fetishizing the object, like Sean with his vinyls in Shaun of the Dead, or Danny with his DVDs in Hot Fuzz. How much that kind of fetishization in your life feeds not only your love of art, but also your work?
Well, I think in the sense, actually, I mean, I didn't know, obviously, that the lockdown was going to happen, but I felt like I'd been preparing for it for like 20 years, because like, but there was like a large number of like DVDs that I'd bought but not got around to watching. So it was one of the few sort of like upsides of the situation, was like, oh, I guess I finally got time to watch these DVDs that I bought, so which I'd had for a long time. So, you know, I think the reason I still buy physical media is because, you know, as you know, like a lot of the streaming sort of services, the libraries kind of constantly shift in their rights. And so it's not something that's permanent. No sort of streaming library is a permanent thing. Things change all the time, and sort of libraries lose rights. And you know, even the best ones in the world, like the Criterion Channel or the BFI, have rights to things at some point and then not others. So I sort of, if I can, I mean, I guess one thing I have started to do in the last couple of years is I just kind of like blind buy like classics. Like, so I don't need to have seen something to, I just think this is supposed to be great. I'll just have a copy of it. So I feel like I've been sort of doomsday prepping with my movies. And you know, but that doesn't take away from like I said, the supporting the big screen experience.
Do you think that making genre films, which they have a striking visual language, is kind of a fetishization of the film image in a way? It's in genre film, it's not reality anymore. It's pure fiction. It's pure cinema.
Well, I like the idea of I like the idea of pure cinema, the sort of the idea of storytelling. And I think it was Michael Powell coined the phrase pure cinema. And if you think about something like Alfred Hitchcock, there's something in his movies where something makes sense within a movie logic. There's something that kind of works within a movie that doesn't necessarily completely relate to real life, but totally serves the story and the style. And I really like that. Like, so it's something where, you know, because then obviously the great thing about film is that you can kind of do anything, and like you can have films that are incredibly naturalistic to the point where you can't even believe that there's a camera crew there. I mean, I find that frequently about, you know, films that are shot in a very naturalistic way. I always have to stop myself and thinking like, oh, there was like a crew filming this. This isn't just happening. And then there are other films that are very stylized and sort of, there's a level of artifice to it, which is part of the way that it kind of conjures its spell. So, you know, I think that's the great thing about the medium, is that you can kind of do anything. And I think sort of like, for there to be a medium that's been going for over 100 years, where you can still be finding ways to kind of like sort of break conventions is pretty amazing, you know. And I don't know. I mean, I think sort of, I guess, you know, I've made films in different genres because I sort of I love those genres, and I want to find out a way of doing something new within a genre that I've loved. And sometimes you watch so many of those films, it starts to just be sort of like osmosis, you know. I think when we wrote Hot Fuzz, we watched like 70 police films. When I was making Baby Driver, writing it, I was just watching so many heist films, to the point where it's just like you can't really remember where one started and the other ended. You're just kind of in that world. And then you're looking for the thing that can make that your own particular sort of way of doing it. So, you know, I guess that's it's something that I really love. You know, I don't know whether I'll ever do like a sort of social realist film, but like sort of, or anything like that. But like, it's not that I can't. I mean, I really admire like sort of directors who work in a completely different way to me, and yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, even if when you make Bad Boys in Gloucestershire for Hot Fuzz, you manage to foresee the reality in a way, because these old folks that want to make Sanford great again are like the things that led to Brexit in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, because I mean, I grew up in a town. I grew up in the town where we shot Hot Fuzz, so it's not like sort of. Again, it's like a similar thing. It's like sort of what's happening now is alarming but not surprising, and there is that thing. Like, I mean, Hot Fuzz was made like 13 years ago, but you know, both Hot Fuzz and Elements of the World's End, people have sort of said as some kind of like Brexit predictor. I mean, there's even a thing in Hot Fuzz where Jim Broadbent's character, the sort of murderous, you know, head of the local police, he says a line that's like stunningly close to Donald Trump's campaign slogan.
Yes.
Like, he says, "We'll make Sanford great again."
Yes.
And it's like, and it's, you know, very close to Make America Great Again. I mean, yeah, I don't know what to say about that, other than it's that thing. It's like I was saying, is like sort of like these paranoid fantasies come true. Is that, you know, something like Hot Fuzz is like growing up in a small town, and my mum is quite a big conspiracy theorist, I'd say. And when I was a child, I think sort of my natural inclination was to sort of like not believe her and sort of think that she was like full of shit. And then as I got older, I'd be more curious about these stories. And around the time I was writing Hot Fuzz, I called my mum and I said, "Hey, you know, you said all those stories about corruption and conspiracy in our town and in the nearby towns. Could you write all that down for me?" And she did. So she wrote me this document, and it was the document was titled "Spooky Doings." And it was basically like a sort of, it was almost like reading a James Ellroy novel of all the sort of like the stories of murder and conspiracy and corruption going back hundreds of years, you know. So it's, you know, sometimes it's that thing is that like people work in genre sometimes as a delivery system to get across like ideas. Because there's a certain audience that might watch Hot Fuzz or Shaun of the Dead or The World's End that might not watch some like sort of like very serious minded movies on the same topics. So in a way, I always think of genre films sometimes are like a Trojan horse, you know, where you could actually sneak in some bigger ideas into sort of something that's ostensibly a zombie movie or a cop movie, or, you know, like a robot invasion movie. And the other like sort of, and that I think is also what's great about satire, is that you can kind of, you know, you can make some serious points in something funny. And I've always sort of believed that that's kind of like a really, hopefully, you know, the movies that they're more than just what's on the surface, you know?
Yeah. In this exploration of genre, how do you prevent deconstruction and commentary from being parody?
I think if it's done with affection, I think that's the point. I think in terms of I mean, Baby Driver is a little different, but it's got the same spirit of it in terms of it's done with, I think it's just done with love for the genre. So in that sense, I think there's a big difference between, like when Shaun of the Dead came out and Hot Fuzz, and people would use the word spoof, we would always, me and Simon would always bristle a little bit at that word, because I felt like sort of some of the spoofs that were around at the same time seemed to be just quite, you know, they're just, it was like they hated the genre. So something like Scary Movie or any of those films, they seem so like they like sort of think the entire genre is dumb and like sort of unworthy, and let's just kind of like rip the shit out of this kind of genre. On the flip side, I hope that something like Shaun of the Dead, we used to call them like a Valentine, is like done with such affection that really like we're making a film within that genre. And in that particular one, it's like what the characters are doing is funny and what the situation is funny. So it becomes more situationist. So I think that's the thing, is they're done with huge affection. And I think that's where it becomes something that's like sort of very heartfelt and is like a serious entry in those movies. So that's nice to me, is that like, in terms of like when people do lists sometimes of like the best zombie films of all time, and you know Shaun is somewhere in there, that's great, because it's not kind of considered, it's considered like a film within that genre, it's not considered a spoof of that genre.
Yeah.
So that's the distinction, I think. And then even in Baby Driver, which is like more of an action film sort of musical than a comedy necessarily, but there's that seems spirit of it, is that sort of it's done. I wouldn't spend like 3 years making a movie in a genre that I didn't love. It takes too long to make a movie, you know, to have that in your system. You've got to absolutely love what you're doing. So any of the genres that I have tackled is done out of like just infatuation and obsession.
What I find interesting is that you have this affection for genre and for pop culture, but there is another level in your work, I think, is in almost all your films, in direct or subtext ways, you talk about the influence of pop cultures in our lives, the weight of it, and how it can even be a burden sometimes when the reality doesn't match the fantasy. Is it something you struggle against as a filmmaker also?
I don't know if I struggle against it. I think it's more about being true to my own identity. So I guess when I was very young and making amateur films as a sort of teenager, I would make these kind of like sort of genre like parodies, because I guess because I'd grown up with, you know, where I grew up, you know, pretty much the only things on at the local cinema were like Hollywood movies. You definitely didn't, until I was a teenager and I could start driving to other places, there's very little in the way of like international cinema and art house cinema. I didn't really start watching that until I was like in my late teens, just because it wasn't on offer. I didn't have a VCR. You know, sometimes there'd be things on late night at TV, but it would usually be like, well, as soon as I mean, weirdly enough, I remember when the first time I got a car when I was 17 and I could drive to my nearest big city, which was Bristol. I think the first film that I went to see on my, like with my car, was Delicatessen. You know, it was just because it was like, I'd seen clips of it on TV. It was like, I've got to see this movie. Like it's sort of the Janae and Caro movie. And so I guess to answer your question though, I guess the movies are sort of like, I'm making a movie, but I've got to be true to who I am. And because I'm like a kid that grew up in a small town in England, there's always that sense of aspiration. And that goes through from like even before Shaun of the Dead to like Spaced, is this thing about like your reinterpretation of Hollywood movies. I mean, in a way, you know, that's obviously like in many of the great French New Wave films, that was like sort of what happened in a sort of like an explosive way, is filmmakers taking what they'd seen in like 40s and 50s crime movies and reinterpreting it through their culture, and then sort of like, you know, kind of resetting the clock, and then Americans trying to copy them. So I think it's just something that it's just like and even like with things like Scott Pilgrim and Baby Driver that were made in North America, I would hope that they still have some personality, that there's not a sense that like, you know, that like you're watching that movie and it looks like it could be made from somebody in the States, I guess. Like there's an element in both of them where I'm kind of like sort of, you know, that there's a sort of, you know, you're observing it from the sidelines, or you're trying to sort of look at it from a slightly different angle. And I think that is just your interpretation of the sort of culture and the sort of the diet of like Hollywood movies that you're fed at a young age, you know?
Do you define yourself as a postmodernist in a way, or do you want to put a distance between postmodernism and yourself? Because Baby Driver was less postmodern than your other films, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, and I think maybe the next one as well, Soho, is even further in that direction. I mean, I don't have anything. I am. Yeah, there's an element of in Space and Shaun of the Dead Hot Fuzz and The World's End and Scott Pilgrim, where there's the sort of like a postmodern quality to it, and I don't see anything wrong with that at all. I think it's like sort of you know, sort of Scott Pilgrim particularly is like it's almost like you're watching the entire film in the lead character's head. Mm-hmm. It like seems like a sort of magical realism, solipsistic fantasy existing in the lead character's head that you're witness to. So I mean, I guess Baby Driver was an attempt at doing something that was like sort of, even though it had a sort of left field style to it with the music, there's an element of it which is sort of, you know, hopefully there's a sort of sincerity to it in a sort of different way. Not that the other films are insincere, because I think Simon particularly is like a really great grounding kind of influence, but it was a slightly sort of a conscious decision in a way. Like sort of, I think I could see with something like with the movies that I had made up until that point, and with Scott Pilgrim, that even though they were like well regarded and had a lot of fans, there was this sort of this ceiling as to how well they could do internationally. And I guess Baby Driver was an attempt to see if I could kind of sort of break that ceiling. And so I made some sort of changes, and in some cases I think went more extreme with it, as a sort of to see if like that was a way that I could you know, like have a film that did better around the world. I noticed that and France was one of the exceptions, but like sort of most of my movies prior to Baby Driver would do well in like, you know, the UK, America, Australia, France, and nowhere else. and I thought, well, what can I do to kind of try and reach some other parts of the world? So I guess Baby Driver had less of a focus on dialogue. It's more visual. You know, it can sort of be enjoyed without really, you know, the dialogue is not. You can enjoy the movie and the sound and the music of it all without necessarily having to understand exactly what they're saying the whole time. Mm-hmm. So I guess it was like a push towards visual storytelling. And I think probably the Soho film that I've just done is even further in that direction, you know.
The Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End were, as you said, anchored in some kind of an American movie culture, but they were also very English and in the English culture. Then you shot Scott Pilgrim in Canada, and Baby Driver was set and shot in the US. And your next film, as you say, is in London. What do you like and what do you learn in this constant back and forth between England and North America?
I think it's just good, you know, like I loved making Baby Driver in the States. I love making Scott Pilgrim in Canada. I guess I alternated both of them with British movies. I guess it's just a sort of thing of not forgetting who you are, you know, like, and not completely getting lost in the system. It's not a completely conscious thing. I guess with Baby Driver, like, because the film had done really well and there was a lot of pressure and so to do a sequel, I thought, well, if I'm going to do a sequel, I want to do something else in between. And I want to do something else that's like very different and that's what the Soho film, Last Night in Soho, became. I'd already had the idea, but I knew that it was the time to do that. So that then if I did another American film next, like I'd done this, something else that was like, a piece of British cinema, in between. So I guess there's a conscious effort to do that. I don't know whether I'll keep doing that for the rest of my career or whether we'll even be making films in 12 months. I have no idea. But so far, that's been the plan.
There is one recurrent villain in your films is the past and the nostalgia. And as an artist,
wait till you see the next one.
Yes, because I guess it matches present day and the past. That's right, if I understand well. How much this is a personal struggle of yours? Is it a personal fear to rehash the past or something? What is your take on that? Do you know why the past is your villain in your films?
I don't know whether it's a villain as much as it's an obsession, and it's something that, the next film is literally about this, actually. In The World's End, Gary King is kind of like cursed to try and recapture his youth. And I think we all know people like that like sort of, peaked when they were 18, and it's usually a sad thing. Usually the coolest guy at school, that was when he was at his coolest, and like, it's kind of then he's trading on former glories. And we thought that was a really interesting character, and we knew people like that, and and so but I feel like I've always like had a complicated relationship with my past, just because it's part of who I am, and on one hand you're trying to sort of like escape it all the time, but then you kind of sort of glorify like your youth, and then on top of that I sort of have this recurring fantasy about going back in time, and I think about it all the time to the point where it's an obsession. I'm not quite sure. Maybe I need to see a psychiatrist and tell me why, but it is that weird thing where, like, I think all the time about time traveling back to like decades that I wasn't in, or like I always actually found like in the movie Midnight in Paris, there's a thing actually with Marion Cotillard's character, like where she is in the 30s in France, like the jazz age, but she's unhappy and wants to be in the Renaissance instead. And I remember when I saw that, I was like, I know that feeling. Like sort of, it's like the idea of like not being happy in your day. I mean, it's not like I'm not happy, but I definitely like obsessed with previous decades. And being in London, particularly, like it's something where it's so rich in cultural history, and yet the city moves on architecturally. So, I watch old movies shot in London and looking at the locations, and sometimes the ones that are like, actually I live very close to where Michael Powell shot some of Peeping Tom. It's literally like a couple of streets away from me. And weirdly, one of the locations is still very similar to the movie, and that's rare. Like, I mean, I think probably Paris more than London is actually sort of more preserved as a city. London, there's a lot of like kind of architecture that moves on, or like kind of really sort of cultural keystones that have been like sort of demolished and stuff. So I don't know. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the villain in my films. It's more like an obsession. But obsession in its own way is debilitating. So I guess can be a negative thing, yes.
Also, no matter the genre, all your films are romance or bromance. And your characters fight with love and commitment and etc. Do you know why this theme is central to your work?
I don't know really. I mean, I guess at the end of the day that like all good films are relationship films in some way. I mean, I guess you have in genres, obviously you have amazing films about strangers, but they're still about relationships, like North by Northwest, like Cary Grant doesn't know anybody who's in, he doesn't know who Eve Marie Saint is, before the movie starts, but that becomes like a romance movie. So I guess like, like the majority of movies are relationship movies. And I don't know. It's definitely not like a concerted effort. I think it maybe with the ones that are with Simon and Nick, you're looking at a genre, but you're doing it through the kind of like the lens of a relationship movie, in the sense that like Shaun of the Dead as a relationship film would still sort of, the central dilemma is the central dilemma to the movie is separate from the zombies in a way, or it's exacerbated by the zombies. In sort of, Hot Fuzz, to some extent, you've still got like a little drama, even if it didn't go kind of action movie crazy. The World's End, there is like a Mike Leigh version of that movie that doesn't have the robots come in, where you can just continue about that theme. So yeah, I think that's always like I think especially in like Shaun of the Dead and The World's End, there's an element where first continues through to the end, even though insane, kind of apocalyptic stuff is happening.
I'd like to talk about your process of work. There is one thing central to your work is editing. How you use transitions, repetition, and dramatic cuts, and off-screen, etc. When you were a student, you were exercising a lot in editing, doing stuff in your on your own in university. Is it then that you understood the power of editing as a language?
Yeah, I used to. Well, I guess when I was making amateur movies when I was a teenager, I had to learn how to edit myself, because I used to edit by crash editing by like 2 VCRs together, literally pressing play and record. And then when I got to art college, I was at this college beach, and in the kind of spring and summer term, like the campus would be deserted. Everybody would be at the beach. And so when I realized that, I thought, I'm going to use the editing rooms whilst everybody's gone. So, and basically, whilst everybody else was getting a suntan, I decided to try and hole up in the editing booth and teach myself how to edit. I wasn't really on a course where, I wasn't really on the film course. I was on like a sort of a foundation course. So I pretty much taught myself how to do it. And, I think my first film I made when I was 20, like one of the huge lessons I learned making that was that we didn't really have enough coverage in that movie. It was extremely low budget. You really have a lot of coverage. And so in the editing room, I was left without many choices, because there was not much, without resorting to like French New Wave jump cuts, there wasn't really any way I could like pace up the movie. So everything after that, I think I overcompensated massively and like really planned everything out, did storyboards for everything. If I, or at least shot lists. But everything from Shaun of the Dead onwards has been like fully storyboarded. And even though sometimes you change what you're doing based on the day or like the location, it's always like a roadmap of how to, kind of make the movie.
Mm. You mentioned the storyboard. Like you storyboard almost every shot of your films. Is it not only a tool to search for what you want, but also a tool to communicate to your crew what you want?
Yeah, it's both really. I mean, you don't always show them to the actors. Like some actors don't like looking at storyboards, and I totally understand that, because they don't want to feel that like I've already like created exactly what I want. So actors don't often look at storyboards. It's like not that useful to them, but it's useful to the crew, so everybody can understand how the sequence is going to be built in a day, or kind of crossing things off, so we got an idea of where we're at and what we need to do. But I think probably I sort of think about the pacing in my head, so I've kind of like done these storyboards thinking about the pacing of it. So something like Baby Driver, for example, which is all set to music, and we had all the songs cleared before we started filming. We had edited storyboards to the songs before we'd even shot a single sequence. So maybe like a couple of nights before we started shooting, me and the editor and the DP and the AD sat down and watched the animatic of the film. And it was really interesting because you could kind of get a sense of like how it's going to work or what things weren't working. So it's really like a roadmap to, especially, you know, with complicated shoots, it's kind of like a good way of, you know, I've never been that who comes on set and just finds it. You know, there are some of those people like the Robert Altman approach of like, you know, not having a shot list at all, coming to the set and finding the scene. I've never been that sort of director. I'm more sort of like, I've got something in my head. Usually the movies you're making is the thing is I have something in my head and I have to find a way to put what's in my head onto the screen, you know.
You mentioned Baby Driver and the music, and you're one of the directors who makes songs centered to the storytelling. And Danny Boyle says that it's easy to get addicted to the needle drop and to the use of songs in films. How do you find the balance in how you use songs in your films?
I guess I tell you what, you have to like use songs that you'll never get tired of. So that's the key. That's a big key to me, is that sort of a song that you thousands of times. And then that's where there's pure joy, is where there's some sequences where you never tire of the sequence because you love the song. Like in Baby Driver, there's a sequence late in the film set to Barry White, Never, Never Gonna Give You Up. And I like never tire of watching that sequence because I love the song. And every time we were like mixing it, or every time we were in the editing room, whenever we play that bit and it gets to the chorus, I'd be like, you know. And then there was another song in Baby Driver where it started to kind of get on my nerves during the edit. And then we had some reshoots to do. And I begged my producer, said, hey, I just want to do a couple of bits with that scene in the kitchen. So I want to change the song. And so we just reshot part of the scene so I could kind of get rid of the song and have a new one. Because I'd sort of, in the edit, I'd listened to this one song, Nut Rocker by B. Bumble and the Stingers. And like at first it worked really well and we shot the scene. And then like by the 100th time I'd heard it, it started to get on my nerves. So I wanted to change it, and I did.
Yeah. The Champs-Élysées Film Festival is a festival of independent films. You're in a very interesting position because almost all your films are often linked in a way or another to major studios like Universal or Sony. But you're also always produced by English companies like Big Talk and Working Title. Would you say that your producers, Neil Park, Tim Bevan, and Eric Fellner, are some kind of a shield to protect your independence?
Yeah, for sure. And in fact, me and Naira have just started a new company. We're no longer, you know, so we left Big Talk and we now have a company called Complete Fiction. Mm-hmm. And I'm still working with Working Title. Like the next film, next two films are like Complete Fiction and with Working Title. Yeah, I think so. Like they allow me to sort of make an independent movie with a studio, I guess, because I'm sort of like working with Naira and like Eric Fellner in London or through the set of their offices, rather than necessarily, you know, so you get the benefits of working with a studio in terms of like the support and the distribution and the marketing and everything like that, but it feels like you're making an independent movie, you know. I think those lines are a little blurred, to be honest, because, and have been for a while, because there isn't really like the studio backlot like there used to be. Like even if you're making a film with Warner Brothers or Paramount or Universal, you're probably not going to be on the lot making the movie. That seems to be something that's like gone. You know, people are filming all over the world, you know, in different you know, sort of studio complexes. So I don't know. I think also like sort of the lines got blurred between sort of like independent and studio films to a certain extent, when most studios then had a mini like independent wing, you know. But then there are films that are like truly independent, that like, and those are always the films that are like incredibly inspiring to me when I see something that like just knocks my socks off, that clearly isn't like, you know, like a studio a Hollywood studio film that like sort of is just incredibly inspiring, you know.
Mm. I guess we're going to go to the audience questions now. The first question is from Cyril Donyuki and Charlene Roux about the fact that in Scott Pilgrim, the fight scenes were almost like the musical numbers of a musical. And Baby Driver was set to music. It was an action musical. But will you see yourself make a full-on musical with songs and dance?
I would like to if I found the right thing, for sure. I mean, I think the next film, Soho, has another sort of number of musical moments in it. I always really love working in dance and doing big choreography sequences. And I think if I found the right thing, the right material, I would love to do a musical. It's just about finding exactly what that is. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the genre, and you know, frequently. They actually, you know, like the BFI in London, the BFI South Bank, which is like one of the great repertory cinemas, they always show a lot of musicals on the big screen. So I do, you know, go and see them on the big screen quite frequently. So yeah, I would love to do that if I could find exactly what that is. Yeah, absolutely.
A question from Juliette Sange. Why have you been drawn to comedy, and what are your influences in that genre?
I guess I was always I think when I was kind of in my as a film fan growing up, probably the genres that I was most sort of obsessed with initially would be sci-fi and horror and comedy. And those also thrillers and westerns to some extent, but I think that was a sort of two real obsessions. And in terms of comedy, film comedy, TV comedy, things that were quite sort of revolutionary, and I don't know. I guess the and then also the films that sort of that are somewhere in the middle that are so inspiring. You know, really influential films to me, Coen Brothers film Raising Arizona, or Delicatessen that I mentioned, or you know, Jacques Tati, growing up the Zucker, Abraham Zucker, and Mel Brooks, and you know, the Marx Brothers, you know, so all sorts of you know, kind of comic filmmakers or comedians that would mean so much to me. So Monty Python, you know, I think sort of just it definitely was and is an obsession, and you know, I don't know exactly what it is, but I've always felt I'd like to kind of return to something that's really an out and out comedy, a bit, you know, sort of Space, the TV show, or Scott Pilgrim, which is kind of just constant gags, but it's more, you sort of just find yourself led by what's kind of something that's a sort of a current obsession. So usually these things is I never say never. I said, oh yeah, I'd love to do a full musical. I love to do another comedy, and it's just about finding exactly the right idea at the right time, you know.
Yeah. A question from Cedric Rastelli. Would you like to remake a great classic? And if so, which one?
I don't know. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I usually think the things that are worth remaking are films that are flawed. I think films where they're classic, really classic, what's the point? Unless there's something in terms of the period or the setting where you could radically change something. Yojimbo and Fistful of Dollars is a great example because they're in different countries, in different genres. One is a samurai film and one is a western. I think that's good. And but I think sometimes they're sort of I think recently a lot of the horror remakes of this kind of century are not adding something, you know, in the way that when I was growing up, that sort of films like Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or David Cronenberg's The Fly, or John Carpenter's The Thing, are sort of doing something quite radical with the material. But I don't know whether, on the flip side, is that like much as it was interesting as an experiment, you know, Gus Van Sant Psycho, I was like, okay, you know, it's like just it's interesting, but I don't really see why. So I think with something, I'm sad to say I don't have like, the answer of like I'd love to do this. You know, like usually it's something like that. There's a film that's kind of somewhat flawed, that like, or very flawed, or was a bad adaptation of a book that you want to sort of like take another crack at it. But then sometimes those, you know, like that material has got its own following, and then you're really in trouble. Is like people love this crappy film. So actually trying to remake it, people saying like, oh, why would you remake this? And saying, well, I don't know about you, but I think the film is bad, but could be really good.
Yeah. A question from Clément Rabillet. It took years to make The World's End and Baby Driver. You had the idea long before you make the film. Do you have other old projects that you like to make in the coming years?
Not too many, actually. I mean, I think Baby Driver was the one. Yeah, was the one that was the longest from like the gestation to making it. It was probably like, I don't know, like 17 years or something like that. Like from having the idea and then actually doing it, maybe like 18 years actually. But not really too many. I mean, the one that I'm working on at the moment, Last Night in Soho, I've had the idea for like 6 or 7 years, maybe more, like 8 years or something. And but there wasn't. I mean, actually, when I wrote Shaun of the Dead, it was really like the first proper screenplay that I'd ever done. And Baby Driver didn't exist as a screenplay. It was just an idea. And I had the one other screenplay that I wrote was this thing called Crawl, which was about teenagers on a pub crawl. And that became like the first 5 minutes of The World's End. And I guess like there's other things that I've been working on, other adaptations of things, not too many like original scripts. I'm not sure I have like an original script which I haven't done. I wrote this animated film for DreamWorks called Me and My Shadow, which didn't get made, you know, like and maybe it will someday, but like but other than that, it's more like sort of the idea of things rather than something like, here's a screenplay that I've been sitting on since I was 15. No, I don't have those.
And the last question will be from Anaïs Dupuis.
So fast. Where did the time go?
Yes, it's almost 50 minutes already.
I can go till 6 if you want to.
I can ask 2 more questions if you want.
Okay, sure. Yeah, okay, so I'm not going anywhere.
So the question from Anaïs Dupuis is about the writing of your scripts. If she wonders if you have a method, if you like to use specific structures like the ones explained by Joseph Campbell or John Truby, or if you like to write more instinctively.
I do actually use some of those script structures as a guideline. I think it's like, you know, some of those screenwriting books get like sort of have a really bad reputation as being formulaic, and things like Save the Cat, kind of like, as much as they're really popular, there's a, you know, like a lot of other people say, oh, this is like leading to very formulaic movies. But sometimes if you're trying to, or with the Sid Field structure, if you're trying to make something within a genre and you're trying to subvert like sort of existing formulas, it can be useful to sort of look at those parameters. So I think sometimes I find it useful in terms of like having up on the wall like the index cards of like the idea of it, so you've got the shape of it. So very, very infrequently have I written something where I've just been writing. Like, so Baby Driver is probably the weirdest writing experience, because I would sort of try and write it to each song. And so I wouldn't write the scene until I'd found the song. So it'd be a lot of like, kind of like listening to things and trying to sort of get the right tone before I actually started writing. But I find those things useful. I think that one of the things is like, some of those screenwriting books is like, it might feel trite and cynical, and the way that they're written is more about like selling screenplays than actually like the creative art of writing. But I think if you kind of like sort of try and like cut through all the nonsense, there are like you know, there are good little lessons about writing in there. I think you just have to, I think with any of those books, if you want to read them, is you just take away what's useful to you. They're not like a Bible to follow, you know. But I personally feel like having like a little like roadmap of where I'm going is a useful thing, and figuring out where like the middle of the movie is, and like, you know, otherwise things kind of can get unwieldy and stuff, you know. But then so many of like my favorite movies, I sort of like, maybe like movies that I'm obsessed with, but I've never read the screenplay, but like something like 2001, which is, it's quickly becoming the film I've seen the most over the years. Like maybe when I was a teenager, if people said to me, what's the film you've seen the most? It would probably be like Raising Arizona or Evil Dead 2 or something. But now, like, sort of, I think 2001 has now like sort of outstripped that by maybe like, I mean, even in the last like 5 or 6 years, I think I've seen it 5 times at the cinema. Anyway, I watched that movie and then I think, what did the screenplay for this look like? You know,
Yes.
you know, what is the screenplay for this movie? And like, it doesn't really seem to conform to any conventional structure, and yet it's a Hollywood movie. You know, it's a sort of an MGM like big budget movie. I mean, it's also made in 1968, which is obviously a very different Hollywood. So I'm always like, that said, is that even though when I see a film that seems like utterly like breaking all the rules, I'm excited, you know, that something is like, you know, doing something radically different, you know.
And the question from Lulia and Lart, how did you meet Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, and how much their characters in the Cornetto trilogy are in a way inspired by who they are?
I think, you know, I don't think there's a lot of them in Nicholas Angel and Danny from Hot Fuzz. I think probably they're closer to their characters in Shaun of the Dead and The World's End. But usually, like, what you do is you sort of like write. It's almost like a sort of like a Christmas Carol or something. You start writing like the Ghost of Christmas Past or the Ghost of Christmas Future. It's like you write these characters of who you could have been. So like, I think for like me and Simon, there's a lot of both of us in Shaun. And I think in Nick Frost's character Ed, there's some of him in that. But it's like a comic exaggeration of us as like the much less successful versions of the same people, but they are the same people. And then I think with The World's End, I think there were sort of like elements of like the darker elements of like, you know, like who we've been and who we could be in those characters. I think it's unavoidable. So I think that's the thing, is I think you sort of like, you do write from the heart, and in some ways you write sort of comic material out of like the fears of who you could be, you know. Definitely like Shaun of the Dead is like, that's what it's about, is the idea of being complacent, you know, complacent in life and complacent in relationships, and sort of just and the zombies are like his wake-up call, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think we have to wrap. So thank you very much, Edgar. It was an honor. Thank everyone who joined us. And I'm handing over to Mrs. Dulac now.
Thanks, everybody. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person. It would give me nothing but pleasure to be in Paris right now. And I hope I can come back as soon as possible and see you all.
Bye bye. Voilà. J'espère que vous avez apprécié autant que nous ce magnifique échange avec Edgar Wright, que je remercie encore d'avoir vraiment accepté cette invitation. Et merci Aurélien, parce que ça ne va pas être évident de faire toute une masterclass en anglais non-stop comme ça. Et merci aux internautes pour vos questions. Restez avec nous, puisque vous pouvez évidemment en ce moment voir le film de la compétition française Grève ou Crève de Jonathan Resquigno. Et puis à 20h30, rendez-vous pour le DJ set de la formidable Barbara Butch sur Zoom, et vous aurez le code pour nous rejoindre à 20h25. Donc soyez fidèles au festival comme vous l'êtes d'habitude, et je vous souhaite non seulement un bon week-end, mais une très belle fin de festival. Merci, à bientôt.